Greetings, it's Jurgis. Hopefully you're doing well. I'm at church today, as you can tell. I'm not in my garden or at home. This talk that I'm about to share with you is my views of the Theotokos, the bearer of God, of giving birth to God, the Theotokos. Oftentimes she's referred to simply as Mary. In Orthodoxy, she is referred to as the Theotokos. We have her on the royal doors, oftentimes depicted. Well, that's not the royal doors, but that's the royal doors. We have her depicted when the Archangel Gabriel, she's over here. The Archangel Gabriel approaches her to let her know that she has been chosen to give birth to God the Word, Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And oftentimes this depiction of her is with her hand up like, I don't understand, but may your will be done. She gives her consent to be in the Theotokos. Many of you have seen my first video that I posted, Mount Athos, an American Protestant pilgrimage. And I came to this church in anticipating to understand, to know some more of the theology, the book understanding of Orthodoxy. And for those who are new to Orthodoxy or curious, I would highly recommend a couple of books by Timothy Ware. As someone who grew up seeing Mary, the Virgin Mary, depicted on the dash of my grandparents' car with a little statue, me being in the back seat, and I knew my grandparents were very devout Catholics. And the Virgin Mary, that's pretty much all I knew of her, was basically, it was a solitary statue. Of course, in church I saw. But over time, going back to my preparation for Mount Athos is often referred to as the Garden of the Theotokos. When she was traveling with John, who, as we remember, on the cross, he said, behold your son, John, behold your mother, in terms of assigning John to take care of his mother. They were traveling and the storm was coming, and they gave shelter into Mount Athos, what's referred to as Mount Athos today. And the understanding is that the Theotokos, she loved the scenery, the beauty of Mount Athos, and she asked that this would become her garden. Today is why women are not allowed in Mount Athos, because the only woman who is allowed in Mount Athos is the Theotokos herself, because she asked that it be her garden. And so, as I was preparing for my trip to Mount Athos with my own reading and from talking with Father Tim, I ended up, as you can tell by the video, going to Mount Athos. When I came and I shared with other people, spoke to another priest who's here, Father Chris, and he had heard my story as a Reformed Calvinist, Protestant, going to Mount Athos. The fathers at St. Anthony Monastery in Arizona said it was the Theotokos who invited me. And when Father Chris shared that with me, I smiled. But it was a concept at the time where I wasn't really comfortable with acknowledging that today, from a person with a different perspective than I had. And I'll say that my perspective isn't because I just read and read more and more. I would say because I was able to interpret, reflect back, and understand that, yes, the Theotokos blessed me. I asked her to pray for me, but it wasn't always something that was that close as it is now. There was a wall. And I would say many, for Protestants especially, as I talk to you, oftentimes that wall is Catholicism. And those who are Catholic would understand this as well, perhaps, because in the mid-19th century, the Pope put forth something that he believed was without error, that was from God, and that was the concept of the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary. But most people can understand that if you believe that you need to be baptized and you need to be washed of your original sin, well, how is it possible that someone who is born with sin can then conceive and bear someone who is without sin? And so I'm not going to go to that angle to talk about that today. But the Catholic view to address that was, let's just make Mary also her conception immaculate. But again, it's only in the mid-19th century that this is something that the Church brought forth. Now, the Orthodox do not view that same position. And I want to read a little excerpt from a book on the Orthodox Church. But since 1854, the great majority of Orthodox have rejected this doctrine, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, for several reasons. They feel it is unnecessary. They feel that at any rate, as defined by the Roman Catholic Church, it implies a false understanding of original sin. They suspect the doctrine because it seems to separate Mary from the rest of the descendants of Adam, putting her in a completely different class from all the other righteous men and women of the Old Testament. From the Orthodox point of view, however, the whole question belongs to the realm of theological opinion. And if an individual Orthodox today felt impelled to believe in the Immaculate Conception, he or she could not be termed a heretic for so doing. And I think that is something that I want to talk about as well. That's important from an Orthodox perspective. Unless there's dogma dealing with the nature of Christ and some very firm theological bedrock opinions, to have a different perspective isn't something that can be referred to as calling someone a heretic. So in this case, Orthodox don't believe in the Immaculate Conception. Most Orthodox do. But of course, as we just read, that if someone were to believe in it, they wouldn't be labeled a heretic for doing so. And that's one of the freedoms that's involved with becoming Orthodox. Again, unless it's really a central dogma of our faith, it's a large umbrella, in which to have a point of view or a view. Yes, I believe that I was invited, not knowing at the time, by the Theotokos, to visit her garden and to experience what I did. And I also believe that after a few weeks of not being in this church and coming back one day, since I do a lot of the landscape around the church, I have a need to be inside occasionally, and I have access to the church, and oftentimes when I come, no one's here, but I oftentimes pray here, and I often confess here, as I do in addition with my Father Confessor, but oftentimes it was here on the corner. There is a depiction of the Theotokos with Jesus, and I would pray here often and again confess. And it was during one of those times in which it had been, like I said, a number of weeks since I had been at church. I can't remember exactly why right now, but it had been a couple of weeks. And I received a text pretty immediately after I finished praying here. And it was Father Gabriel Almanis. Many of you have seen his work in terms of, I have a number of icons from him. But there was this one icon that he had been commissioned to paint on Mount Athos for a Russian church, an Orthodox church in Russia. And so something had happened. They weren't able to take possession of it or pay for it. And he asked if I knew of anyone who might want a icon of the Theotokos. After a while I was here, I was struck that I was just praying in front of the Theotokos. And here I am being presented with an opportunity. Months had gone by, and finally I reached out to him and said, is that icon still available? So when I see the Theotokos now, I don't see her as a standalone figure on a dash in my grandparents' car as a statue. I always see her with Christ. And so my perspective is when I see the Theotokos, I see God the Word became flesh, and that the Theotokos was used of God to allow him to become flesh in this world. And so Orthodoxy does not equate Mary or the Theotokos to be within the Trinity in terms of praying to. And so from a Protestant perspective, we think that the Theotokos was just out of the blue picked, and she had a decision to make within a short period of time. But my understanding of the Theotokos is not that way, and the teachings of the Orthodox Church would show that it's not that way. Now, the one thing that I would differ is, of course, there's free will. I do believe in free will. Although I also don't believe that when Mary was approached by the archangel who told her what was about to take place, that was a free will moment. Now, in essence, yes, Mary could have said no, could have said whatever she had initially thought within her, but she had been prepared. And so my understanding of what I share with you is that the Holy Spirit works in our lives, prepares us. We might not understand what it's going to be for, but when we understand that the meaning or the purpose or what has been presented to us is of God and glorifies God, yes, we have the free will to say no, but we also have the indwelling of the Holy Spirit that confirms that we're of God and that there's a blessing to that. And I would say there's actually a joy in connecting with doing the will of God, where technically we have free will, but again, Romans 8:16, the Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that were of God. And I definitely believe that Theotokos experienced that. So yes, from an earthly perspective, she made a choice, but also I would say that she made a choice, please, spiritually, that she couldn't make otherwise. She had been prepared. The Holy Spirit had prepared her for this to take place. And for those who also think that Mary could have said no, I'm not taking that away from a practical human perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, again, I'll push back and say, Mary could not have done otherwise. She had been prepared. The Holy Spirit had dwelt in her. And so her saying yes was her free will, but it brought her joy to say it. And so I would also say that Jesus was in her womb. John the Baptist had already been in the womb of Elizabeth. The Holy Spirit had not prepared Mary to be the Theotokos, the God-bearer, to let her understand the spiritual joy she was receiving, even though her journey was difficult to see her son crucified and all that she dealt with later. But spiritually, that was the right thing to do. And I say that is when we see Mary with Jesus, we need to think about how is the Holy Spirit impacting your life to the point where if you're presented with doing the will of God, to glorify God, even though you have free will, everything that's in your life, everything that seemingly matters to you, materialism, a house, where you live, social standing, social security, economic prosperity, a good 401k, IRA plans, the kids who do the right thing, going to the right neighborhood, living in the right city, going to the right church. These things matter to you, except when we know we're doing the will of God. When these things are taken away, we are still able to say, your will be done. And so I think as we think of the Theotokos, we need to think about her being an example to us, to put us in that situation where we can give up and just say, your will be done, not knowing what's going to happen, but trusting, because there is a spiritual blessing to that. There's a joy to that seemingly we don't otherwise understand. But the Theotokos understood it. Mary understood it. As you live your life, you can understand it as well. So remember, I'll leave you with this, that I was at Helendar Monastery. And I remember my friend Nicola, who I met on my first journey to Mount Athos, but he brought me to a special icon of the Theotokos. And there was no one there, and he actually encouraged me and said, I want you to pray to this icon. I had no problem praying to the icon, but I would say again that my understanding spiritually, my heart understanding the significance of the Theotokos, and to me, she's been very loving, she's been very patient, she's been very kind, she has been very tolerant of me and my past experiences as it relates to her. But I prayed sincerely, meaningfully to her that I don't understand everything there is to know about her. I thank her for the blessings that she's connected with me receiving, and I do believe that, and to help me in my faith as I grow, and also to more frequently turn to her, but someone who made a decision, who experienced spiritual joy, but also had the natural concerns that we often have in our lives. But she went forward to let me understand that, to let me experience the faithfulness that she had in God. I pray that you have an opportunity to experience the Theotokos, that when you see her, often see her with Jesus in her arms, the Word become flesh and dwelt among us, and approach her from that perspective. So hopefully you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you on the next Orthodox Gardener.